This conference will now be recorded.
All right, any questions for me? Anyone, any questions before I get started? So again, just to do a recap, we are going ahead. We went ahead, did something called as Git repositories. Yes, good, please. What is the kind of error that you're getting in a CMD when you're trying to restore? hmm When you say some error, you'll have to specify what is the error that you get so that I can, kind of guide you. Are you getting something like the SDK is not found or something like that, or some download something called as the .NET SDK out here? So go to .NET SDK download, say .NET Core SDK download out here, come down to this particular website and say download .NET SDK x64 and install this out. This should resolve that particular error. So it's happening because you do not have a software development kit on your system, so it won't really restore. So you'll have to download this SDK and then you'll have to restore it. Did you install it out? When you install it out, make sure that that particular SDK is getting reflected on your program files. Also, do a system restart. Once you download it, install it, do a system restart, and then come back and see whether you are whether you are able to, let's say, go ahead and restore it out. You should be able to restore it once you are able to done. If you're not, just get your system. I'll check that once. Yes. So I was telling that this is what we are following right now. So we have an Azure repos, and in this repos we do have right now a branch called develop branch, and we are committing all the code into this particular branch called as a develop branch out here. So let me put it as git. Again, this is a git based repository, so I'm using all my git commands like git clone, git, let's say, pull, git push, git sync, and all that stuff. And all the commits that are done to this branch are via a feature pull request. So you do not really have developers, or developers do not have the ability to go ahead and do a direct commit. Reason being, I have something known as branch policies that are protecting my branch out here. So I have something called as a branch policy. Okay, let me center. I have something called as a branch policy, which is telling I will at least require one person to approve this out before someone can merge their pull request into the branch. And as in when someone, as in like a developer, goes ahead and merges the pull request, I have attached this to a Devops practice out here, and here I have created something called as a continuous integration pipeline. I have something called as a build pipeline right now, which will at the end give me something called as an artifact. Now, artifacts are nothing but, again, as I said, it is DLLs, binaries, all these are the artifacts out here. Okay, let me put this as properly artifacts. So these are nothing but DLLs. These are nothing but binaries that get generated at the end of the pipeline. So if I go back into my dev.azure.com and look into my project, let me open that out and look into that particular project called DevOps Learning Aid. There is this particular branch of my repository wherein all my code is sitting in, and I created something called as a build pipeline. And if I edit this build pipeline, it's a .NET Core build pipeline that I do have, which is starting with something called .NET Restore. And in the restore, I'm doing something called .NET Sample Pipeline, something like this, and I'm pointing it out to something called what? A CS project file of my project. Since this is a .NET Core application, I'm pointing it out to the CS project file. Then I'm doing the .NET build. So I'm running the .NET build command, and very importantly, guys, please check this out. There's something called configuration of a build. Let's see this. Let's come here and let's go into our code that we have. Okay, where is our code? In junk, something like this. Okay, fine. Let's see, this is a demo repo. This is Android, and inside this I have my code, which is all the CS project file and everything. And on my local machine, if I open up the CMD, I can do a .NET restore. Firstly, this is just going to go ahead and understand what is the project and restore it out, and it's telling all the projects are up to date. Then I can do a .NET build and give an additional command called hyphen hyphen configuration. Normally, a project supports two different kinds of configuration while you're trying to build it. It's either something called release or something called debug. Two different configurations out here. Again, purely a development terminologies out here. Don't really have to know this, but if you know it, it's a good to know information. So it is debug and release configuration. Now, when I build my code in a release configuration, I will get the artifact which you can just take readily and deploy this out. So now it's telling, okay, fine. If you see this, it's telling e junk and etc. And then it's something called as release configuration. Release configurations are called clean builds, meaning just the build, just the code that you need to run it on top of, let's say, an environment like your web apps and all that stuff. But sometimes what happens is that developers don't want this in a release configuration. They want to understand where their code is, let's say, getting the error and how their code is really performing. For additional logging, you would want to build the code in a debug configuration. Two different configurations. One is release, the other is a debug. When you build the code in a debug configuration, now see, do you see this folder that you get? It's inside something called as debug, as opposed to something known as release out here. So if you take the DLLs that you get from a debug and deploy it onto an environment like a web app, the code when runs will give you additional logging information so that you will be able to understand where your code is getting, let's say, or which section of your code has the errors and all that stuff. And debug configuration is something which is very popular in something, I mean, if you, let's say, are deploying this code onto something like development and QA environments, but you cannot release a debug code or you cannot deploy a debug code onto an environment like production. You cannot do that. So you have two different configurations, and that's what it is telling you out here. On the pipeline also, it is telling, okay, I'll do a .NET build. Do you want to give me an additional configuration? By default, it is release. But here it is telling hyphen hyphen configuration space, unlike what we did on our local machine, which is called debug and then which is called release. Here it is in a different way, right? Which is dollar and then it's telling build configuration out here. Guys, whenever you see something called dollar, open and close parenthesis, whenever you see this dollar, open and close brackets, these are called variables in Azure DevOps. Now, just like in PowerShell, we used to do a lot of variables. We said something called as dollar is equal to something. The use of variables is that instead of, let's say, giving release and etc., let's say you have multiple projects and you're doing multiple builds out here. Instead of going to each and every build task and telling it is release, I can give one common variable telling build configuration. That's what they did out here. Telling it is dollar open close and then build configuration out here. Now, in order to see what is the value of this build configuration, I will have to go into a section called variables in Azure DevOps. I'll click on this. I have something called build configuration, and what is the value? Release. It's a key value pair format that you kind of give, and then scroll down, something called publish. Under publish, again you have configuration, build configuration out here. Very importantly, there is something called hyphen hyphen output, and even this is a variable in Azure DevOps. Sorry, even this is a variable in Azure DevOps. Dollar open close And in here it's telling what? Build dot artifact staging directory. It's telling, okay, fine. When you publish it in a release configuration and send it to an output folder called build dot artifact staging directory. Again, where can I see the actual value for this one? Variables. Let's go into variables, and I'll try to see for build dot artifact staging directory, but I don't get that. Then why exactly don't I get that one out? I don't have this at all. I have build configuration which is pointing to what? Release, but I don't have this here. If I go into publish, I don't have this variable called what? Build dot artifact staging directory at all. I don't have this. All these variables are called predefined variables in Azure DevOps. These are called predefined variables. You don't have to define them. Azure DevOps has already defined them for you. You can start using them. For example, if you want to check the list of all the predefined variables, just go to variables out here. There's something called predefined variables. Click on this link. You'll come to, let's say, a page called use Azure DevOps predefined variables. It's telling variables give you a convenient way to get key bits of, let's say, various parts and all these things out good enough. Look for a variable. Let's say in our case, I'm looking for a variable called what? Build dot artifact staging directory. Just copy this out. Control F on this page. Put this in. And this one. It's telling build dot artifact staging directory will point out to something called as what? A folder on the agent machine. Meaning this is the final folder where all your artifacts after getting converted are stored. That's the reason I am passing this variable here at the publish step. When I'm telling when you're publishing it, until now you did a build. So build is done. Build is done in a release configuration. You have all the artifacts. Please store it inside that particular build.artifact staging directory out there. And finally, from that build.artifact staging directory, you will have all the artifacts in that particular A folder. Take that and publish it as something called as a drop folder. That's the reason if at the end of your build pipeline, let's go back and click on this one. You have something called what? Published artifact. Here you have what? A drop folder that got created inside which you have the .NET sample app.zip. That's the reason if you look at your pipeline logs, right? The very first thing it's doing, it's initializing the job, and initializing job means it is getting a agent for you from the cloud. And for this to happen, you should have the parallelism request already enabled. After that, it has something called checkout from Android that @develop branch to what? S folder. S folder is also called build. It's also called, let's see, build dot sources directory. It's saying what? The local path of your agent where your source code are downloaded. For example, C agent something like this /s. In my case, it's just something like this. Let's see. Let's see if I am able to show you the S folder. Something like DA1S, and then inside that all your high level code out here. And then you do a build. It's telling, okay, fine, I built this out. And all the build is now sitting in where? The S folder. After that, I'm taking all the build and publishing into what? The A folder of that particular agent, because I said that the output should be what? Build dot artifact staging directory. I'm now taking all the artifacts from the S and storing it inside something called A. And finally, I have the publish artifact from that particular A folder into something called as a drop folder on my build pipelines out here as such. So this was our end-to-end pipeline, which is going ahead and doing a restore, build, publish, and then finally something known as the publish artifact out here, and later you can use this artifact that got published with the release pipeline to release it. We will also see that. But any questions till here that I can take? Any questions that I can take till you? Anyone? Anything till here?
Kiran,
Go on, please.
is it same for every kind of application, only for .NET application?
It is not every kind of application. This is only for .NET application, which means that any other application, like let's say Python or something like that, you won't have a .NET restore. You will probably have, let's say, something like pip restore. There's something called pip for Python. There's something called maven for, let's say, Java. So again, the concept is same. Restoration and build, the concept remains same, but you cannot use a .NET restore out there. You cannot do a .NET restore on a Java application. You'll have to do a maven restore or something like that.
Okay, Kiran, thank you.
Yeah, can we change the artifacts to value?
Can
Like
you
a
change
release
the
value?
like the release value? That's a configuration value that you're talking about, is it?
Yeah.
Yes, you can change it. Here you can say it is debug instead of release. Instead of saying release, you can change that particular key value pair to debug out here. So you will get a debug artifact in place of, let's say, the release artifact.
Mhm.
One more question out here. Is there a concept of data types for these variables? Concept of data types, no. All the variables that you pass are strings, are string values out here. So there isn't any proper concept of data types for this particular variables that you pass. Yes, good. So someone offline another question. Do you define any custom variables? This is a custom variable. Yes, you define a lot of custom variables. Azure DevOps entirely depends upon variables. And how do you define custom variables? Again, in here, I don't have a lot of scope to define a custom variables. But when you do a release pipeline, you get a lot of opportunity to go ahead and define a custom variable. There I'll go ahead and explain how do you define a custom variable, what can you do with custom variables and all these things. We'll have a separate session for variables and something called as variable groups. We need to dedicate one complete session for that. Can you come again, please? Correct. Mhm. Mhm. When you say multiple codes, are you telling that your project has, let's say, something like .NET, Java, Python, and all that stuff? If yes, you will have to maintain different pipelines for it. You have to, let's say, maintain different pipelines for it, or you can have multiple stages out here in the same pipeline. Telling that it is python Python. You can execute this in the same pipeline as well. But I would say it's a best practice to maintain multiple pipelines for multiple projects out there as such, which will help you maintain clean artifacts. Otherwise, it will get a little confusing for you to add Python again .NET in the same thing. If the pipeline fails, right, you won't be able to clearly identify why the failure has happened, where the failures happen, all these things are. So better to maintain one pipeline for one particular project type or one particular coding standard type. Yes, any more questions here?
For every project, we have to raise a parallel request.
For every project, not for every project, for every pipeline you have to use a, let's say, a
Yeah, yeah,
parameter. Again,
yeah.
in an Azure DevOps project, you can have multiple pipelines, and each and every pipeline can have multiple variables within it. Yes, I'll just take a question offline. Yes, go ahead, please. This is a build pipeline, not a CI. I didn't go into CI. The CI is called continuous integration. I didn't go into CI. It's not Jenkins. It's Azure DevOps. We are doing build using Azure DevOps. No, I didn't cover Jenkins yet. I didn't start Jenkins at all. So I didn't start Jenkins at all. This is not Git. This is build service in Azure DevOps. So Git is done. Git is done last week. After that, we moved into something called pipeline service in Azure DevOps out here.
If in real time experience, if
This will
the
be the
client
second.
says,
Mhm. Good, please. Go ahead. In a real time, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, and if the client says to create a Python code, we need to create in Python, like pipeline.
Correct. I mean, not the client, but I would say the developer, because the developer will
Okay.
give you an idea what kind of a code is he writing. Is it Python? Is it Java? Is it .NET application? Is it C Sharp, Golang? What it is? And depending upon that, we'll have to provision the pipeline accordingly. Yes. Any more questions here?
Okay.
Good, please. For building it, again, it depends upon the complexity of your project. For example, some projects might have database inside it. You have to also build the database. Again, for a basic simple build pipeline, shouldn't take you more than a day. Yes, it will take a day, my friend. It will take a day because you'll have to build, develop, and test it out. If it's an hour, then why will projects like Android take 1 year to release a code, right? It depends upon the complexity, because right now a lot of consumers are working with microservice architecture. It's not a monolithic architecture anymore. It's a microservices that they are working on. So you just won't have one pipeline. You'll have multiple repositories, hundreds of repositories probably, and hundreds of pipelines that you'll have to create. So all these setup is something that you will have to, as a DevOps engineer, kind of provision for the team. Again, purely depends upon the size and what you're building out there, and let's say the number of people in that particular team out there and such. Yes. Any more questions? Again, let's come back and let's come back here. So I have all this setup done. I connected my, let's say, Git repository into a branch, and I connected this branch into a pipeline, and this pipeline is giving me something called as the artifact. Now this is a build pipeline, meaning if a developer goes ahead and makes a change, let's say I'm a developer, I want to make a change. Again, if I want to make a change, I'll have to create a feature branch and then make a change. So let's go do that. I'll say new branch. I'll say feature. I'll say this is Kiran test change. I'll say create this out. I'll say this is .NET sample. And in the .NET sample, if I just scroll down, I'll say this is something like pages and etc. Inside that, I have a index.html page. This is something that we've been changing. So I'll say this is version 2. I'll comment this out. I'll say change the version of the code to 2. I'll say comment this out. And after commenting, what should I do? Pull request and delete the branch. So I'll say create a pull request into what? Develop branch. I'll say create this out. And one reviewer must approve this out. So I'll say approve. Again, yeah, this is done, approved. Setting one reviewer is approved. I'll complete it out. And as and when I complete, yes, go ahead, please. Go ahead, please. Hmm. Good question. If one reviewer, you have added one reviewer, he's not there, then what do you do? Good question. That's the reason we don't add one reviewer. We add a group of reviewers. So instead of adding a reviewer, we add a group in Azure DevOps. You can also include something known as group. A group will contain multiple people. So one among that group can approve this out. So you have a group of technical leads. You can add those people out there, and one from that group can approve this out, and it'll still go ahead and let's say take this approval as such. I'll also show you how to create groups and add that particular group out there. So I'm now putting the complete option, deleting the feature branch, and all my code now is there inside the develop. Now it's now trying to merge the pull request into it, and all my code is now there inside the develop branch of my repository out here. Now what should I do next? Again, if I go here, look at the history, I have a change, which is version 2. The Git repository is able to track that this is version 2 out here and etc.